This is very old. It's a very old T-shirt, and it's been. It's a dispute that's been forgotten, almost forgotten. If you were to ask anybody about the main disputes in the last quarter of the last century, they would automatically say the miners' strike, Grumwick, Wapping, and this was also a print union, a print factory. Who remembers the GPMU, who went on strike, but they were forgotten. And the reason they were forgotten was that the picket was never attacked vigorously by the police, and therefore it got no media attention. And because we're forgotten, the GPMU delegation to the Belfast Trades Council, when asked to support this group, organised a function in Belfast, and they sent around the various unions petition for money for them. When we got some money, we got the function, and I bought this at the function in support of this group. And it's amazing how many people never heard of it. As I say, if you asked about this strike, it wouldn't be one come to mind because nobody knew it ever existed, except those within the movement. And that's why I picked it. That strike happened in 1983. You know. And because of it, it's a very engaging T-shirt. People see the logo on it, and they don't know anything about it, so therefore you can interact with them and discuss with them about the dispute. And one of my long memories was in about 1985, I was wearing it in the garden, doing a bit of gardening, and British troops come around, and one of the troops stopped me and says, "Why are you wearing that T-shirt?" And he says, "Because I'm gardening." You know, it's not a bad day. And he says, "No," he says, "I had friends working at R. Smith." He says, "That's the same R. Smith in England." And he says, "Yeah." And he says, "I'm surprised that somebody with an Irish nationalist background supporting that." And I said to him, "Well, class knows no borders."
Well, 5 years ago, I had the opportunity of going to Australia as part of a delegation from Oxfam International, in which we spent 6 days with an Aboriginal community in Mornington Island at the north of Australia, in the Gulf of Carpathia. It was a small island with about 1,300 inhabitants. Almost all of them were Aborigines. The only white people there were the principal and the school teachers and the policemen. Everybody else was an Aborigine. And there was rampant unemployment, rampant alcoholism, endemic poverty. And the Aboriginal community had clearly suffered from gross abuse, racism, for many, many years. Indeed, since 1915, there was a government act in Australia which allowed the Australian government to steal children of Aboriginal communities. This is what became known as the Lost Generation, where it's anticipated that 100,000 Aboriginal children, babies, young children, were actually taken forcibly from their parents so that they could be brought up by white Australians. Absolutely shocking racism of the worst kind. So when I was in Australia, this is the flag of the Aboriginal community, and I wanted to celebrate the fact that I was in the real Australia and not the Australia with their flag that they have now.
This was probably one of my first activist T-shirt, probably the first activist T-shirt. I wore it on a picket line for a strike, which was back in December 2003, when I first became involved with the trade union movement. So it was a strike that was over pay. It was a public sector strike, and it was civil servants who were striking against poverty wages. And it was a great moment to be a trade unionist. And it was a good sort of, I suppose it was a good baptism in terms of being on picket lines and being an activist as well. So that day there was probably around 30 on our picket line, and it was just a great moment to be part of something like that, you know, a great measure of solidarity. And even though we were on strike, there was sort of post workers and bin collectors and delivery drivers who wouldn't cross the picket line as well. So it was a good moment of class solidarity too. The T-shirt itself, I had them made. This is actually, I think it's from a French strike originally, and the reason I like it is because it's a subversion of a well-known global sports brand who were at the time actually notorious for exploitive working conditions in Bangladesh, especially against women workers.
Well, it's my Don't Attack Iraq T-shirt. It dates from the 15th of February march in London, 2003, and I bought it on the march at the time. And it's been important to me. I was involved in a campaign to try and stop the attack of Iraq, to try and end the sanctions on Iraq. And at that time, we were looking at Iran being a problem in the region, and of course they're still called a problem in the region, and Iraq is still an issue. So the T-shirt has faded, but the issues of Iraq have not faded. They're still there in the headlines. So it's precious to me because of that. I think we were right.
Well, I thought it was an interesting quotation from someone who, was more associated with capitalism. If it was a quote from Marx, you would know immediately it was anti-capitalist. But this is quite a critique of capitalism. The nastiest people, for the nastiest of reasons, somehow are going to make a better world. And I mean, that is very, very sarcastic. So I thought, so when I saw it I got it from redmolotov.com, where I got a lot of my T-shirts. And I just thought, this is the one. And I work with young people. I teach young people 16 to 21. So it's a good conversation starter, when we're talking about politics and, when they're trying to understand what's going on in the world.
I chose this particular T-shirt because it reminds me of activism that we did around campaigning for the 1967 Abortion Act to be extended to Northern Ireland in 2007. The Human Embryology and Fertilisation Bill was going through in the UK, and it looked like abortion legislation may be extended to Northern Ireland. So a group of pro-choice activists and trade union activists got together really to start campaigning around the issue. And I think the lottery hadn't been out for too long, so we thought, the statistics were that 40 women a week were leaving Northern Ireland to access abortion in the UK and further afield. So we thought 40 women a week, it could be you, was a good strapline or a good logo to use to reinvigorate the campaign.
We went to Cuba, Brenda and I, in 1995, first trip. And it was an organised trip, so we've seen quite a bit of Cuba. And I bought this in Cuba. I was very good. I've kept it all this time, and I wear it quite a lot. But I've always kept it, and I suppose that's the one I've worn is because I actually was there and bought it in Cuba. And as I say, it was a marvellous trip. It was just me and Brenda and a group of about 7 or 8 people from all over Europe. And so it was great memories of visiting Havana and then Santa Clara, and then we went down to a place called Trinidad. It was the first place actually the Spaniards arrived at. It was in a real old town as well as, and meeting Cubans and having those sort of political debates. And what I found fascinating with the Cubans is that they're dead open. I found that fascinating that you go to a country that has been under pressure from the biggest country in the world, the United States, the embargo, and denigrated by most of the West as some form of communist dictatorship, and you find that openness. Even if you talk to people on the streets, it's a very open society. Instead of a society being, which I could have said to people, I didn't believe the propaganda of the West, but being there and coming back, you're able to say no. There is no none of that restrictions that you think or and actually in some parts of the Soviet Union where it was in the last lot of years that people were frightened to speak. The Cubans are not, and they're quite honest and open.
Well, this T-shirt is a commemorative T-shirt that the Belfast Trades Council did, so that we had our own wee memory of our trip to Cuba in 2009, we decided to go along with the Unemployed Resource Centre. There were 34 of us in the group, and we went because it was the 50th anniversary. The May Day celebrations acknowledging the 50th anniversary of the Cuban Revolution, and we felt it was very important to be there given the success of that revolution and how Cuba has proved that we can have a different type of society. There were, of the 34 of us, one of the people who attended was a veteran of the Spanish Civil War. And for us and for the people we visited in Cuba, that made it an even more special occasion that Jack was with us. We believe that workers of the world, if they were united, could create a very much a different society. But I want to keep it as well because it's a memory of that brilliant trip that we had, where the humour and comradeship was fantastic, but the opportunity to explore politics was brilliant as well.
Well, we got these T-shirts designed last year to coincide with the visit to Northern Ireland of the G8 leaders. We were organising a festival of ideas and events, of music and political talks, to try and say that we felt the world we live in is not the place that it could be. And the slogan we chose was "Another world is possible." And that was a direct challenge to the world which the G8 leaders reign over. I think the slogan resonates amongst people. No one that I know thinks the world is perfect. Everyone that I know wants to see improvements in one way or another. We live in a world where a child dies every 5 seconds needlessly. We could save those lives. And even in a relatively wealthy part of the world like here, we can't seem to afford childcare places, can't seem to afford enough schools, we can't look after people when they're ill, we can't look after people when they've retired or pay them decent wages while they're at work. So we chose that slogan for the T-shirts. We got a load of them made, and I think it carries a powerful message that provokes discussion. And as a trade unionist, and myself and comrades and friends of mine, I suppose this is we want to fight for a better world, and we want to encourage people to join us. And this T-shirt seems to me to encapsulate a lot of that. The top of the T-shirt also says, "We only want the earth," and that's part of a quote from James Connolly, famous Irish trade unionist and socialist, who said, "Our demands, most moderate, are we only want the earth," and we're saying, working people should benefit from the wealth they create. We should have a say in what we make and how it's distributed, and how that is distributed equally. So, if you like, we're saying another world is possible, but it's a world that workers and working people have a say and have control over their lives. So it says enough. It says really what I think I believe in, and what a lot of people I know believe in.
The organisation is Astra. Astra is like one of the biggest, what's called gestaches in the Basque Country. It's formerly a squat, illegally occupied big building that has now become a community centre. What's kind of special about Astra is that Astra was the arms factory in the town of Guernica that the Luftwaffe and Franco's regime bombed. That's why they attacked Guernica, to get control of that arms factory. It has since went redundant back in the 50s or 60s. So it was this huge, big, open building, 3 stories, that all the kind of young people from the area, bereft of any sort of youth facilities or community facilities, went to then squat and occupied. Renovated it, done it up, and then they sort of turned it into a community centre. It's used for everything. It's used for dance classes, language classes, community meetings, women's groups, art groups, everything.
Well, as you all know, I chose 42 T-shirts, and this happened to be one of the longest standing ones that I've had, So, of course, the fight for civil rights and against apartheid is a really important one. We had a picket at the Duns stores, organised by Belfast Trades Council, and we had musicians there. And as you know, the young women from Dublin helped to forward that campaign. And in actual fact, we got to know some of the young women because they went to a conference with us in Moscow in 1987. And I also met the leader of the women's section of the African National Congress, Gertrude Shopey. She was in exile at that time, but she's back in South Africa now. And I also met Kader Asmal, who taught law in Trinity College, Dublin. And he went into government, I believe. So it's been interesting to see the developments that have taken place and to see Mandela were released, of course, but he had a long walk to freedom, and it's still onward going when it comes to the economic issues, you know.
The T-shirt was produced really to raise awareness of, I mean, not only the committee, making the members of the committee more visible on, you know, at events and within their own union and marches, rallies, etc., but also to raise awareness of the trade union movement. Really thought it would be a symbol that would, you know, a lot of people would catch, particularly younger people would catch their eye, and would then draw their attention to the trade union movement, you know, something that a lot of young people may not even be aware of today.
Well, this T-shirt is from my home state of Wisconsin. And basically what was happening was just back in 2011, right around Valentine's Day, the Republican governor, who's very conservative, very much aligned with the Tea Party, had published provisions as part of what he called the Budget Repair Bill, which was basically going to strip public sector unions of their collective bargaining rights. And my understanding was that contained in the same bill was provisions basically that would affect their health care and pensions and access to pay rises that would match inflation and things like that. So there's this massive outcry amongst the unions, which I suppose you would almost expect from Wisconsin. It's one of the strongest kind of union states in the country, which you might not think so now because it's gone so conservative, but it was huge, huge protests. Thousands of people came onto the streets at the universities and the Capitol building. They occupied the building. At one point, it's a public building, but they were actually camping out and had developed like a community within the rotunda of the Capitol building in Madison. But the governor was refusing to negotiate with the unions or with anybody. So the Republican lawmakers were actually trying to force through the bill as quickly as possible, you know, to kind of stop all the public debate and the protests. And so to keep the bill from having quorum so that they couldn't vote on it, 14 Democratic lawmakers actually fled across state lines so that they couldn't be brought to the floor of the Senate to vote. And they were saying that the governor was going to send state troopers after them and bring them back. And of course, you had people on one side saying these guys are heroes, and then counter protests saying, you know, they're shameful, they're breaking Wisconsin and all that kind of stuff. And it went on for months. There was a crackdown on the protesters in the Capitol and got really, really heated. Eventually, the lawmakers came back, and unfortunately, the bill did pass.
This is from our Who Pulls the Strings campaign, which was all about the fact that Northern Ireland is one of the last places in Europe where you can donate large sums of money to political parties in complete secrecy. It's been the case that political donations in the rest of the UK have been open above £7,500 since the start of the millennium, but there was a continual postponement of bringing that into Northern Ireland. And the crisis that led to this campaign was that the government was going to change the law so that rather than being an ongoing rolling piece of legislation, that donor secrecy was going to be made permanent last year, 2013, which unfortunately in the end they did. Very bizarre decisions have been made about planning, especially in Northern Ireland over the last few years. And next year, politicians are going to be taking back planning powers from bureaucrats for the first time since the 1970s. And that again led to the urgency that led to us picking this as a campaign, because if you have fairly low-ranking politicians, councillors, having weight put on them from further up the food chain from MLAs and MPs and leaders of their parties, and you can't link that back to basically ruling political donations out of your inquiries, then faith in the planning system as a whole collapses.
It's my favourite T-shirt. We've got several political T-shirts at home. Big fan of graphical art, comic books, and the cover of the T-shirt is from a cover of a comic book back in the 60s. It's a comic book called, well, it was depicting a lot of the Cuban Revolution scenes. The heroica, gesta heroica it's the heroic deed. So it's all about the Cuban Revolution, but it's depicted in comical form.
It was to do with a festival that took place in Ecuador, the World Festival of Youth and Students, and it was a very important experience, I think, for me in political activism. It was a World Festival of Youth and Students, which takes place once every 4 years, and this year it was held in December in Ecuador, and there was 8,000 young people attending that festival from 88 different countries. And they were discussing all sorts of different political issues, from ecology, the media, the anti-imperialism, the trade unionism, a whole variety of things, and it was very formative for me. And also there was a number of other items given to the display that were related to the festivals happening before in the 80s and the 70s by other people who have gone to different festivals in Cuba and Berlin, places like that. And there's a big tradition of Irish political activists going to these festivals, which are held once every 4 years. I have a comrade who went to one in 1951 in Berlin when she was only 17. And it was such a big experience for her, got her involved very much in political activism, and she ended up becoming, it's Edwina Stewart, and she ended up becoming Secretary of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. So for me, it's part of that tradition of people going out there, so it was important to me to talk about this T-shirt in particular.
I've become very interested in art sort of over recent years. I mean, to some extent conceptual art, but also, who isn't, sort of impressed by the old masters, as it were. Now, Goy is not the oldest of the masters, but this is a painting on here from the beginning of the 19th century. And I bought it at the Prado Museum in Madrid that I was visiting, sort of, and they have the original there. And I love Goya's painting anyway. I think it's so passionate and so powerful and visceral, and simply beautifully drawn, and beautifully composed, all those things. And it was on sale, and I looked at it, sort of, and I knew that there had been various versions of this scene. This is the scene where the French troops are actually massacring people from Madrid who came out to oppose them in beginning of May 1803. And there's a version of it then so striking, and it's such a common thing, sort of, when imperial troops massacre ordinary people. Don't we see it sort of in our own day? So it's capable, sort of, a very widespread application, and Manny did a version of it in the 1870s, I suppose, which was the execution of the Emperor Maximilian, the French Emperor of Mexico at the time, sort of a much forgotten period. There's a version of it done by Robert Balloch about the Irish Civil War, and then a very bad version, a very crude and Stalinist version of it by Picasso during the Korean War. So, I mean, it refers not just to what happened in Madrid. It can be taken to refer to a phenomenon, sort of colonialism and of militarism and imperialism. And I was involved in having a reproduction of it painted by Robert Balloch in Glenfadda Park, sort of in the Bogside, which was the main killing ground on Bloody Sunday. And we went around all the doors and asked people, said, look, this is a painting by the Spanish painter Goya. Would you mind if we did a big version of it here on one of the gable walls? And every single person who looked at it said, gosh, that's great. That is just great. And you set people free, you set their imaginations free. Or when they set themselves free, their imagination is set free. And I think we too often forget that. And, well, I wear and sort of am quite pleased with T-shirts that simply have a slogan on them, like they're advertising slogans and so forth. And depending on the slogan, one can approve of it or disapprove. But those are all their time, sort of, and focused on a particular issue. I mean, something like this is open to all sorts of interpretations, can refer to all periods of struggle, with national struggle and class struggle. And therefore, it seems to me to be more meaningful. And that's the type of thing, sort of, that we, as I say, I hope not in any patronizing way, I think at meetings of labour and socialist organisations and trade union organisations ought to have art and the importance of art on their agenda, as well as, you know, sort of laws against the working class and struggles in the workplace and, you know, struggles of minority and marginalised groups and so on. There ought to be sort of a little bit sort of on the agenda of, I mean, how we represent ourselves in art. And I'm hopeful that over the next year, Derry Trades Council, I mean, ran a series of events during Derry's year in 2013 as City of Culture, you know, so it was mainly either sort of populist pap sort of or elite things which were of abstract, seemingly abstract to the mass of the people. We ran on things of music and of art and of drama. We sponsored a drama about the miners' strike across the water, which is now touring South Wales and so on. So these are, it seems to me, not just legitimate things for the trade union movement to do, they are necessary things for the trade union movement to do. And sort of that's one of the reasons I think it's sort of absolutely apt that there should have been sort of an exhibition sort of political T-shirts presented in a gallery, you know, sort of as well as on a march or on a picket line, in a gallery too, sort of which makes them into art, because art is what appears in the gallery and what is thought of as art. I mean, sort of that's why Dadists and so on, that's why you had urinals installed sort of by Duchamp, if I've and it is art when you do that. And Tracy Eamon's bed is art when it's in a gallery, but if you see it in her bedroom, of course, it's not art. It's just a bed. But when you're asked to consider this and what it means and how it reflects both the personality and the experience and the imagination of a particular artist like Tracy Eamon, then sort of that can be a liberating thing too, sort of, and anything that sets your mind aware with ideas, as art can, better than pamphlets on the economy, which is they're important as well. So in brief, is why I'm wearing this T-shirt.